We'd like to talk about our presentation, the bridge between the clinical and residential department, which is a critical relationship in the treatment of residential clients. If the communication is not effective between these two departments, the collaborative effort will break down and there will be problems that lead to faulty treatment ideas, a lack of success, and overall a poor treatment outcome. Some of the common traps that can be fallen into include ego of different members of the treatment team, or turf guarding of residential or clinical resources in favor of an idea that maybe is focused on what we want to accomplish and not necessarily for the good of the entire team or the client. Sometimes there's just a lack of communication or poor communication where we communicate to one person and expect therefore that it will go to everyone in the department, and yet there are holes in that and people get missed, and we expect things to happen and then they don't. Sometimes we can get into conflicts over being too invested in our own agendas, not because of ego or because of our department, but because we've become emotionally attached to something, particularly for a client to receive in the treatment process. And we want to go through some of these traps and make sure that there's a clear review of what can happen so that we can avoid those. And then we're going to talk about more effective things, and I'll turn that over to my colleague, Barry Fell.
Hi. A few years ago, I worked in a different facility, great facility, and I worked in the residential department. And I remember interventions would come down from on high, from therapists, and it became very apparent to me that the therapists didn't understand the terrain, the residential terrain. They were asking us to do things that really couldn't be done because we were stretched too thin. There were a number of reasons why things couldn't be done. So here at TLOS, we've taken the time to do some research and think about how can you strengthen that residential bridge. So some of the strategies we're going to be sharing in our presentation would be the following. Number one, we recognise the need to keep all intervention, residential friendly. Intervention cannot be complex. They can't stretch staff too thin. So we're going to talk about interventions that are staff friendly, that can be executed realistically on an individualized treatment plan. The other thing we're going to be talking about is the synergistic relationship between residential and the therapists. We see this as a key component. We want to explain that residential resources, great resources, they become interventionists as well as information gatherers. So we recognize that they need to be a part of shaping intervention, because typically it's the residential team that are executing the intervention in the milieu. So we're going to talk about how to develop that synergistic relationship. We're also going to be talking about a principle, what we call the 3 C's, which is keeping treatment clear, concrete, and well communicated for all parties, but specifically between the clinical and residential, why those 3 principles are important and what the residual effects are if you don't follow this principle of the 3 C's, which is a tailored phrase that we use here at TLOS. We've put a lot of time and thought into this presentation. We think it's worthwhile. We believe people will walk away with strong take-homes, and our goal is to make sure this presentation is not theory-based but pragmatics-based, where programs would walk away and say, I would know how to apply that to what we do in my program. That's our goal. So my portion of the presentation is to focus on the solutions, how you can strengthen that bridge, whereas John's going to talk about the traps, which will set up my portion of the presentation nicely. But please accept us, we think it'll be brilliant.
Final part of the presentation will be my responsibility. I'm going to summarize what John and Barry have talked about, talking about some of the traps, reviewing the traps that we fall into as residential clinical departments, as well as the solutions that we've come up with that work well for us, and some of the solutions we've brainstormed that are new. Finally, I will conclude with a panel discussion and a group discussion about clinical and residential departments. What are some of the traps that others have fallen into that we haven't seen before? What are some of the solutions that others have that we haven't seen before? And come together as kind of like a meeting of the minds of everyone that's there at the NATSAP and within the presentation, so that we can come up with better plans for all of our treatment facilities, make treatment better as a whole, so that we can leave the presentation with things to take home, ideas to ponder, and come up with new ways to make treatment better for the students at our facilities. We really hope you'll consider our presentation, and we're excited to be able to come and learn new things, as well as share some of the things that we've learned with those at the NATSAP conference.